Hello, my name is Dr. Jeffrey Barsuk. I am the Robert Herstick Professor of Medicine and Medical Education at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. I currently serve as the Executive Medical Director of Northwestern Simulation, and I would like to welcome you back to another podcast in our series on simulation and healthcare education. Today, I have the distinct honor of interviewing Dr. Barry Issenberg, the Michael S. Gordon Endowed Chair and Professor of Medicine and Medical Education at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Barry also serves as Senior Associate Dean for Research and Medical Education and Director of the Gordon Center for Simulation and Innovation. He is the President-elect of the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. Today, we will discuss several aspects of Barry's roles and responsibilities in simulation that has led him to be an international scholar of simulation. Because there is so much to talk about with Barry, we're going to divide this into two parts. Throughout part 1 and 2 of the podcasts, we will discuss how Barry got involved with the development of Harvey, the cardiovascular simulator, his role at the Gordon Center and his broader role at the Miller School of Medicine, his experience with fundraising and marketing for SIM, his areas of scholarly focus and his role as a member of an international simulation consortium, and finally, his future as president of the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. Barry, it's an honor to interview you today.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's certainly a pleasure and a privilege to do this broadcast with you. I listened to several of your previous broadcasts and always come away learning something from your guest and you that I had not really known before. And it causes me to reflect on my own approach and work in simulation. And so I just want to thank you for creating this series. I think it's a tremendous resource.
Thank you for that. We always start our podcast by asking about a little background and how our guests got involved in simulation. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, as I've listened to your previous podcast and learned about other individuals' journey into simulation, there's some common threads. Usually there's an interest in teaching, some interest or background in technology, often a desire to improve patient outcomes. And what simulation offers is a preference, to blend all of these together in a career. But each story is also unique. And I think I have some unique aspects, but also something very common to your previous guest. For me, it began in 1982, actually, when I was 14. And my mother, who had been a stay-home mom for my whole life up to that point, had to go back to work as a result of my father's illness. And my mother had a background in administration, but also in development and fundraising, working as a volunteer in a global non-for-profit organization related to healthcare. And at that time, she was hired by Dr. Michael Gordon as the senior administrative director and development director for what at that time was called the Medical Training and Simulation Laboratory. Almost after the first day, my mother working with Michael Gordon, she related the type of research and development and work that was going on with the early generations of Harvey. And it immediately piqued my interest. At that time, my own background was in music. I played the piano. I was also working on some computer software programming, actually with an Atari 800. I had grown up in the amusement and video game industry. My father owned several video game arcades throughout South Florida. And by the time I was 12 or 13, I was able to fix and service pinball machines, jukeboxes, pool tables, and then more modern, at that time, video game consoles. And so I had a broad skill by the time I was 14 or 15 to be able to actually apply these in the laboratory where they built the earlier generations of Harvey. And my father's illness had also a big influence on my decision to go into medicine, because at that time I was pretty good at math and was thinking about financing or software programming. And so throughout high school and then early college, I worked during summers and vacations at the center, making, at that time, heart sound and murmur tapes. And so in the previous generation of Harvey, all of the sounds were copied on 4-track cassette tapes. And for those of you and the listeners who remember way back in the day, even before standard cassette tapes, there were 8-track tapes. where each song would be played on a different track. On Harvey, there was 4 main listening areas: the aortic area, pulmonic, tricuspid, and mitral. And depending on where you place the stethoscope, it would trigger that one of 4 tracks to play on the tape. And because I had an interest in music, I had a good ear, I made cassette tapes from the master reels and spliced them together. So for the first several years, I kind of learned all the heart sounds and murmurs of Harvey without really understanding what was generating them from a physiologic basis. They were just kind of like songs that I learned and memorized. And then one of the other things I did, because I had an interest in software programming, I created a database inventory tracking system that tracked all of the parts in Harvey that time. And all the while kind of indirectly learning about cardiovascular disease. And so by the time I was in college, I had kind of a grounding within what simulation was about, but it was primarily from more of a technical aspect as opposed to an educational or certainly a research aspect. So after through college, I entered medical school at the University of Miami in 1990. And there were 2 factors that really changed my career and really had the largest influence of me entering simulation as a career. Number one, and I hope no one's offended, but I hated the way we were taught the first 2 years of medical school. Spending hours in lecture halls, memorizing facts, very little patient contact. There was no relevance of what we were learning and how it would be applied to take care of patients. And this built up over the first 2 years of medical school. The second incident that happened is during my second year of medical school, I herniated a disc in my lower back, and subsequently over the course of the year developed a neuropathy and foot drop that eventually required surgery at the end of the year. And so I elected to take an entire year off to have surgery, recover. But I think more importantly, I spent the entire year working with Michael Gordon in developing programs at the Gordon Center. One of the major projects was the development of a multimedia curriculum in clinical cardiology that could be used with Harvey or without Harvey. And it was designed to complement what students learned in the classroom. It was designed to be fully interactive, rich in multimedia, provided feedback. In addition to developing this curriculum, I had the opportunity of working with, during that year, with curriculum leaders and mapping out a 4-year competency-based curriculum for the use of Harvey and this software, which we call Umedic. And during that year, we carried out a multi-center study at 5 medical schools that evaluated the effectiveness of impact of this new curriculum. And so that year really was instrumental in where I learned how not only to develop the technology, but how to effectively implement it throughout an entire medical school curriculum. And if I look back, I think the benefits of that year, and I would encourage any younger people who may still be in training to think about often taking a year. We talk about when we're more senior as faculty members of taking a sabbatical. Well, this was sort of a sabbatical within medical school that was really transformative in my life. And if I think about the benefits of that years, it gave me experience of developing innovative education technology. I learned how to carry out a multi-center study on effectiveness of a new curriculum. I was able to work with an international collaboration of clinical subject matter experts, educational psychologists, and engineers. And I learned about the importance of involving curriculum leaders and deans of a medical school when you try to introduce new technology and have it adopted. It's so important to have early buy-in from those leaders. After medical school, I then carried out my residency training in internal medicine at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. And about halfway through my training, I could see, and this was about 1996, where the field of simulation was about to take off. And at that time, made a career and life-defining decision to make my professional focus in simulation and not what I was previously going to go into, which was interventional cardiology. And I subsequently then joined the University of Miami in 1998, right out of residency training. But during my last year of training, I worked with Bill McGahey and others who have been part of our consortium to write an overview of simulation and introduce the rest of the medical community to inform them that we felt that simulation's time was about to come. And we published that piece in JAMA, which I felt at the time wasn't too bad for a third year internal medicine resident.
Barry, I didn't know you were a third-year resident during that piece. That piece is probably one of the most cited, if not the most cited, simulation articles ever written.
Well, thank you for that, Jeff. I think I was warned at the time, both by Michael Gordon and Bill McGahey, that to not let it get to my head, that it was probably going to be all downhill from then, because it's very rare for anyone to publish in JAMA, much less an article on education, and even less so on simulation. But this work, both related to Harvey, the UMedic curriculum development, our outcome studies, led to us being invited by the BEME, or Best Evidence Medical Education Collaboration, to carry out the first BEME review on simulation, where we really reviewed the literature at that time to try to answer the question of what features lead to effective learning using simulation. And it was through that experience that Bill McGahey began to generate his ideas and plans for the conceptual model for mastery learning, grounded in deliberate practice, and that you, Jeff, and your colleagues have taken and implemented so effectively at Northwestern University. And I think all along, the biggest lesson, and there were many lessons to learn, is the importance of collaboration. I recognize I was very, very fortunate to have been exposed to several leaders in health professions education who were all so influential in their own right. And these include Ronald Hardin, who developed the OSCE and did early work with standardized patients; Ian Hart, who was a colleague of Ronald in Scotland, and then really developed standardized patient use and the use of OSCE in Canada; Emil Petrucia, and of course, Bill McGahey. And these were all very, very influential mentors of mine early in my career. And then in the cardiology, pioneers such as Gordon Navy at the University of Arizona, Bob Waugh at Duke, Joel Fellner at Emory, and Ira Gessner, a pediatric cardiologist at University of Florida. And then, of course, having a mentor and colleague like Michael Gordon and working closely with him really on a daily basis over a 20-year period, really it informed me as I was developing as a simulation educator and scholar for my early and mid-career. And it's because of that exposure, I've made it a point. One, because it's fun to do and I enjoy it, providing those same opportunities to the next generation of faculty, technicians, engineers who are entering this field. I wanted to come back to the work that we did in the BEME systematic review. At the time, I think Bill McGahey was with me at an AME meeting, the Association of Medical Education in Europe. It was probably around 2004 in Bern, Switzerland, where I was asked to give some preliminary findings of our BEME review. And I'll tell you, Jeff, that when I was going through it, it was one of the most miserable experiences, because you're going through hundreds and hundreds of articles. You think you're finished, and then you look and you see another 20 articles are published, and you can never really get ahead. And it's one of the first projects that I was involved in that you just have to accept that it's not going to be, quote, perfect. But I was kind of down about it. Probably the most sobering aspect of it is you're reviewing a lot of studies, and you find that a lot of what we know to be effective was published 20 years before, and you're kind of discouraged that not a lot of progress has been made in the 20 years. There's some jewels there, but it doesn't seem like they have traction. And so I remember getting up at the AME meeting and just saying that, I apologize in advance, but I'll have to say this has been the single biggest failure in my professional life. And everyone laughed. And Bill says, well, Barry, you haven't been around enough to know that we all fail. It's just part of what we learn. But I think one of the things that in hindsight that we were able to do is we took the findings from the BME on what is effective in using simulation to develop a global survey that we sent to all of the users at that time of Harvey, and use the findings we had from that survey to inform the new design of a new generation Harvey around 2002 and 2003. And we were able to incorporate some of those features in a more scaled down version. Over a 2-year period, I was able to work with an engineer. I was able to co-patent a certain type of technology, and that was able to build back on my own kind of self-taught technical skills from my childhood and my math background. And so that was just a wonderful experience. And over the past 20 years, we have added features to that model. And more recently, working with the next generation of engineers and software programmers, we're working on a new generation system that'll have diversified patient profiles and, more excitingly, the integration of extended reality technology, including AR features to integrate curricular features that otherwise you'd have to look at another screen that will all be in a single field of view, bedside ultrasound, and along with a hands-on combination VR mixed reality immersive model. That part of it, that technical side of it, is almost like a hobby for me. I really don't consider it work. And it's certainly a good distraction after a long day of being in meetings, talking about budgets or personnel, to be able to go into the technical lab and work with our engineers and programmers.
Well, Barry, I think I have seen a Harvey cardiovascular simulator in almost every medical school I've visited. Do you know what those stats are? Is there a Harvey in every medical school in the U.S.?
Almost every medical school. There are some newer medical schools that have just come about. At some point in time, every medical school has likely had one. Globally, there's about 1,000 institutions that have Harvey in about 70 countries. In addition, there's others who use the multimedia software, and I think, but Harvey, I think, is the longest continuous established simulation project, but certainly in academic institutions or in academia. I think the only other longest standing comparable model would be the Resusci-Annie from Laerdal. And I think it's not because of any technical feature of Harvey or the fidelity of Harvey, but it's always been grounded in a strong curriculum model. And one thing that Michael Gordon would always say to others when giving a talk, he would say it's not about the dummy, meaning it's really about the curriculum. The simulation and the supporting materials that go along with it is really to support a curricular need at a medical school or nursing school or residency training program, and less about the bells and whistles of the technology. Of course, those bells and whistles are what attract people and get people excited initially. But in terms of long-term sustainment and integration and institutionalization of simulation, it has to be grounded in having strong curriculum.
Well, I started using Harvey in the late 90s in our medical school, and I suspect it was a lot simpler then. But that was really my only exposure to simulation training other than the work with standardized patients for physical exam skills. So, Barry, let's segue a little bit into your role at the Gordon Center and your broader roles at the Miller School of Medicine. Specifically, you've been very successful with fundraising and marketing for your Sim Center, and a lot of Sim Centers struggle with that. Bill McGahee always tells me to reach out to you to get more information about how we can be more effective in those areas. So could you talk a little bit about that and how you've gone about it?
Sure. Thank you. I think that in my time working with Michael Gordon, I learned many things in many areas, but perhaps the one that's been the most unique is on funding support and generating revenue. And really his gift at generating revenue and bringing in funding was out of necessity, because when he came up with the idea of simulation in 1966, and for that first decade, the world did not know about simulation. The school or institutions certainly weren't going to support it. So he had to generate all the funds on his own. and then demonstrate that it was effective. And he did it in a variety of ways, but primarily as a clinical cardiologist, it was through patient support. Grateful patients who were inspired by him, his passion, enthusiasm, and use of technology, and then use that to trigger other areas of funding. And I think the biggest lesson over time is it's good to have a diversified portfolio or a diversified source of funding and not be too dependent in one particular area. And then I'll go through just right now at the Gordon Center, just the different areas of funding support that we have. What's also unique about the Gordon Center is that we receive very little direct support from our medical school residency training program or health system. About 98% of our revenue each year is self-generated. It gives us a certain level of freedom and flexibility in terms of new areas that we want to develop. I'll, of course, have to get approval from the dean and our financial leaders, but it's a lot easier for them to give approval and say yes when you're saying, as part of your argument and your proposal, that you're going to be providing the funding. But some of the different areas that we receive funds are in grants and contracts. And this is both at the state level, where we develop training programs for first responders and disseminate throughout the state of Florida, but also several federal contracts. We've worked with local technology companies, and often they receive the small business grants from the NIH, and they develop a new technology and they want to be able to test it, pilot it with a sample population. And we often work closely with them when they want to try it out with some specified learner populations, whether they're medical students or nursing students or residents. And we provide a test bed for them. And we have some evaluation expertise that we enable them to evaluate their technology. We generate revenue from courses that we run, and many simulation centers do this, where we are an American Heart Association training center. And of course, at most academic medical schools, institutions, and nursing schools in the US and beyond, have a requirement that every 2 years you have to have ACLS and BLS and pediatric life support certification for your credentialing. And so we provide those courses on behalf of the departments in the health system. But we do provide, although we don't receive a large amount of our revenue, but we do provide service to the medical school in running programs for our standardized patient program and OSCEs, a similar program for our residency programs in internal medicine, surgery, and pediatrics, and our health system. We just more recently have reached out to our health system in the area of workforce training for nurses and more broadly for clinical providers. And I think both in terms of opportunities for growth within the Gordon Center, and then I hope either in this podcast or the next one, of where I think the Simulation Society has opportunity to grow and have impact, is a closer alliance with the health system. And then moving more privately, we've been very fortunate over the years to have support from private individuals and foundations. And then over time, and this did not happen overnight, over a long period of time, we've been able to develop and establish a couple of endowments. One to support the Michael S. Gordon Chair, which I have the honor of being able to sit in now. And also we have about a $12 million program endowment, and the interest from that endowment allows us to invest in the development of new programs. And then over the years, the last one is because the sales from Harvey, the royalties come back to the University of Miami, and some of those are directed to support new development of new technologies and programs at the Gordon Center. And what Michael taught me, what he stressed, and what I've learned along the way is that you can't do this alone. It takes support of many people, and you have to engage them intentionally, almost on a regular basis. And that is, you have to, if you're at a medical school or a nursing school, you have to have support for your dean. You have to have support, particularly moving forward, of the chief operating officer of your health system. On an academic level, it's good to have support and buy-in from the provost or the chief academic officer. And then a group of offices that are often overlooked is a very close relationship with your development office and your alumni office. Because while it can be in an academic institution, a sensitive matter where the dean or the provost has very tight control over individual faculty reaching out to the development office. They have 5-year and 10-year strategic plans about where they want investments and where they want the development team going after the large donors and large foundations. But nonetheless, those individuals that are in the development office are often having private individuals come and visit the institution. They take them on tours, and often they're clinically focused or research focused. Most private individuals give to an institution because of something very personal to them. Usually it's a disease or condition that they've been impacted and have been healed, or certainly a family member. But when they have these site visits, they've got to fill a full day. And you can only spend so much time in a clinic or a research lab. And oftentimes we have had them come by, and we it's almost like a field trip, an education field trip for these individuals to come by and see how simulation is being used to train the next generation and the current generation of clinical providers. It's much more exciting getting them involved in a simulation than it is sitting in a classroom or a lecture hall. And so we became very, over the years, very close partners with our development office. Sometimes it's not there where our purpose is not to have an ask for a particular donor, but just being part of the team. And over the years, we've had donors who had come to the University of Miami interested in supporting basic science research area or clinical science discipline. And because of the experience of going through our center, have made an additional contribution to support education or directly to the Gordon Center. So it's a very, very important group to reach out to. And similarly, the alumni foundation or alumni group of your institution that often work hand in hand with the development office. And then one last group that we have a very close relationship, and this is, and many institutions do throughout the U.S. certainly, is you have a government affairs and community relations team. These are individuals who lobby on behalf of the institution, either at the state level or the federal level, have very close ties with the community, often the Chamber of Commerce, maybe the mayor's office, and getting them involved in knowing what you do. Simulation is a very powerful tool to provide a context of why education is important. For many lay people, the idea of education and training may be somewhat abstract, but simulation, when an individual comes in and sees what happens in a simulation center, they immediately get why it's important for people to be trained, because they see the clinical context. They understand how it can save lives or reduce errors and foster patient safety. And the government affairs team are meeting many individuals at many different levels. And oftentimes they're the ones who can make connections between a societal need and how simulation can provide a solution for that need. One of the things that we've done almost with any visitor who comes by the Gordon Center to tour the center to see what's going on is, one, we make it very interactive. Early on, we would start it out by them coming into a conference room and going through 30 minutes or 45 minutes of a slide over the history and all the programs, and only then take them on a tour. Usually by that point, we're running out of time and they really don't get to participate in much. Well, we put that all away. We basically have a walking tour. We're in the context of seeing a particular area in the simulation center, whether it's giving chest compressions on a mannequin or inserting an airway or putting in a central line. We are able to tell our story. And in that way, the visitor is engaged in the activity and they have a blast. We have them put on a stethoscope and we have them listen to different heart sounds and murmurs, and we ask them about the diagnosis. And all throughout each of those activities, we have someone on our team taking their picture. We usually do about a 5-minute wrap up, but before everyone leaves the Gordon Center who's come through that way, we give them a photo or two of them in the simulation environment. And that little token of appreciation is dramatic in how it impacts the visitors' appreciation for what we do, and it really sticks. It's been a big differentiator, so much so that when I've gone and to visit these people, whether it's a state legislator or an executive in business, often they'll have their certificate framed and on their wall. So it's just a kind of not something that's too labor intensive, but it makes a big impact on visitors coming by and becoming engaged and feeling involved in what you do. And certainly what we've done is after someone does make a contribution or was responsible in us receiving funding, they are now part of the team. And we tell everyone who's ever made even the smallest contribution that you're part of our team and you're part of the mission of saving lives. Because without their support, we couldn't do what we do, and we certainly would not have the same sort of impact on training individuals and hoping that those individuals take that training and improve patient care.
Barry, let's go back for a second to your state and federal funding. I think about our situation at Northwestern, where there's 5 major academic centers in the Chicago area, right in the city, in fact. And they all have medical schools and they all have sim centers. So I wonder how much of your funding comes from your unique location, as well as the fact that there are several military facilities for training in the area.
Great question. When many people, when they hear, they've known all along that we've received state support, they're very surprised to realize that we are, for many years, the only private medical school in Florida, and we now have Nova Southeastern as an allopathic private institution. And why would state at the state level give state funds from taxpayer dollars to a private school? We realize it's really not about simulation, but what you do with it. And so we saw where there was a need with the state of Florida. What is a common statewide need, regardless of whether you're in Miami or Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando? And that is, every year we're at risk for hurricanes. And we realize that wherever you are in the state, you have to have people prepared both in advance of a hurricane, but after a storm for rescue and disaster response. And so early on, we developed a disaster response curriculum, not just to train providers, which we do a large amount of that, but to develop a train-the-trainer model where we're able to now disseminate it throughout the state of Florida. And rather than just isolating it and only being a University of Miami resource, we work with the other institutions around the state, and with our state support, provide them the curriculum, do the training of their instructors, and now they have the resources to provide the training locally. And so it really becomes a win-win. In addition, depending on the particular area of the state and what the expertise are, those individuals in those institutions are part of our task force or part of the stakeholder team or the advisory team. And so while we do receive support for our individual program, we really involve stakeholders and leaders from around the state. One, because we know that there's going to be more buy-in if they're part of the team itself. And also we're able to demonstrate to the state of Florida that we're not just keeping this as a local South Florida program or a Miami program. We're really making it a statewide resource. And we're also, to your point about there could be almost a competition. And there's certainly several more medical schools now in Florida than early on when there was just really 3. The University of Miami, University of Florida, and University of South Florida and Tampa. For many years, there were just the 3 medical schools. We are mindful of and sensitive that some of our partner institutions may have a particular area of expertise, and we don't want to step on their toes. We don't want to overreach. And so rather than trying to be redundant in developing a competing program, we'll reach out to them early on and invite them to be part of the process. And over years, we've developed a lot of goodwill, and there's some reciprocity in that process as well. Although it's a delicate balance. It's something you can't take for granted. New leaders come in. We make it a point to be proactive and reach out to the local institutions to let them know what we do. We offer instructor development programs as a sign of goodwill. And we really try to make it a team. And I can think that when you look at states throughout, at least talking about the United States, that Florida as a state has a very healthy, robust simulation community. There's a Florida statewide alliance in simulation, and the schools really work together. And while we understand there's going to be some healthy competition, I think at least within the simulation space for training, there's good collegiality. One of the other areas, particularly because of our geographic location, there are several U.S. military who have bases there or installments. One is in Key West. There's another one in what used to be called Homestead or in Kendall. And one, because of Miami's geographic location, its proximity to Latin and South America, there's a permanent installation of military, and those individuals in the military need to have ongoing training. And so it's natural they come to an institution like the University of Miami when their personnel, particularly those in healthcare, need ongoing continuing education training. And so we've been able to use our proximity, our geographic proximity to Latin and South America to develop relationship with the military in that regard. The other unfortunate aspect of Miami is it's an area where there's a lot of trauma. Both accidental trauma and intentional trauma, dealing with gunshots. And when the military was evaluating different cities around the country, they looked at those where the civilian victims of trauma are most similar to that they would find on the battlefield. And Miami is one of 5 cities that had a large amount of that type of trauma. And they combined it with a system that had a well-established trauma system, and our Ryder trauma system is internationally known. Probably it was developed in the 80s because of the large amounts of trauma. And for a time, Miami, unfortunately, was known as the murder capital of the world. It was developed out of that need. And the last component of why the military chose Miami to send teams is because we have a very well established and advanced first responder community. Many of the advances in new technologies and in expanding scope of practice among firefighters, paramedics, and EMTs were first started in South Florida. And so the combination of having a strong trauma system, a strong first responder system, and then a strong program that does simulation training, and we all work closely together. It's why the U.S. Army about now 22 years ago chose our location to establish the Army Trauma Training Center.
So thank you for listening today. This concludes part 1 in our series with Barry Issenberg on his role in healthcare simulation education. Bye for now.